Hello, we are back and we are finally ready for the gluing stage. I know some of you have been waiting this whole time just for this. So we're going to do this in pieces and kind of build from the ground up. And the great thing about what we're creating is that the majority of our pieces have flat bottoms, which help us as we are building. We're not going to have as much trouble with wobbling and things being unbalanced. So we are using a very good type of glue that dries fast and is multi-purpose. It really has a good bond, and this is what I like to use whenever I'm creating art pieces that I don't need like hot glue for or something like that. Usually if you were to try to use school glue on this, school glue would be too watery. It's watered down. And so this is just a very good mixture and has, like I said, a good bond, and it dries fast. So I'm going to start by putting, just like we would do on any other art piece, I'm just going to add some glue. Added just a little bit more in the middle. And now I'm going to glue this down to the middle. I'm turning my piece around to make sure that I have about the same around. Remember, this piece is a sculpture, and we know that sculptures have depth. They can sit by themselves and you can walk around them. So when you're working sculpturally, typically you want all sides to be complete, because all sides have the possibility of being viewed by someone other than the artist. Okay, so for my design on my bird, I have this bottom base, and then I have a second base being raised and creating height. And now I'm going to have this platform here for my bird. It's almost like this is a whimsical nest, and then this is maybe some of the green grass or the materials that the bird has popping out of that. So I'm gonna do the same thing. And I'm not going to add the glue to this green part. I'm actually going to add it here, because what would happen if I put my glue all the way around? Is it going to stick? No, because this is a smaller surface area than this. So we are going to add the glue to this piece. And then we will be able just to put this in the middle, turning it, making sure it's where we want it to be. You can even pick yours up and look at it and make sure, turn it around. And if you are using pieces of wood that are gonna bow, which means to bend, or if you're using things that you feel like need to be weighted down, you could take a few books, typically not a paperback, maybe a book, hardcover book, and you could stack them on top of this just to press down and make sure that the glue is bonding. We really don't need that in this scenario, but that's just a little tidbit if you decide to continue creating wooden sculptures on your own. So I have my base, I have the structure of my base now, and I'm gonna have to start putting my bird together. So this is where sometimes it gets a little tricky, because you're going to have to do this in parts, and maybe you're going to even set it to the side on your protected work surface and let it dry for a little bit. So, for example, this tail feather, this back part of the bird, I needed these two pieces to come together. I'm just going to apply some pressure, and then I'm going to lean it like that and just give it some time to dry on its own. And I'm going to continue with the rest. So for the bird body is going to, and I can even already, that's how quick this bonds. You can smooth out if it's starting to bunch out or come out. Smooth that out some. The legs are going to come here on the base of my sculpture, and then I'm going to put the body on top of that. So I'm not having any problems with balancing of my bird legs, even though typically bird legs are very thin and skinny. But because of what we're using to build this sculpture, and it tends to be kind of a bulky piece, it's already standing on its own. So we can continue to add. So since I know that I like my legs right there, I'm going to go ahead and apply some glue to the bottom. And the same for this one. Notice that I am using a little bit more than just a dot, not a lot. Okay, this is a sculpture and we are using wood materials. So we are going to add a little bit more to what we're gluing down, just to make sure it's secure. Now, this is the body of my bird, and it's gonna glue like so. And so far, everything is balanced and sitting on its own. But the pieces of the bird that I'm gonna add to this body, I really need to add while it's laying down before I stand it up to the sculpture. So the body is like this. The head is going to be like this. And so I'll start with the body part. I'm going to overlap my wings on this side. So I'll glue the first one down. Remember, I didn't paint everything on the back because I knew that not everything was going to be visible. So once I glue this down, and if I were to pick it up and see that there are parts that are visible, then once this is dry, you can't do it now, but once this is dry, you can go back and make sure that it's finished. And the same for this part as well. And so when I stand that up, it's gonna be like that, and I can kind of make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. And I'm just gonna move this right here to the side and let it dry. And I'm gonna continue working. Now for the head. So I have my beak, and I have one side with one eye. and the beak. Glue this part down and let that start drying. Now for some of my details, I'm gonna close my glue and wipe the tip while I'm waiting and waiting for some of these different areas to dry. For my white part, I was able to add some black details the other day, but my white was not working. Remember, we had I had gotten the coloration transparent, and it really did not, it was not doing anything for me. The black took multiple coats just to get to this part. The white was so transparent. This is an example of the white on my intermediate piece. This is 2 coats at least of the transparent coloration white. And then up here is, underneath is another type of white tempera that I tried. And then the final type of tempera that I'm using here is the art tempera that I ordered. So I would suggest to you that when you are getting your black and your white for your neutral details, that you ask for the Blick white tempera and the Blick black tempera. Okay, if you are working with those details, that's really what you need to be able to get the details that you want. So this is the white that is the lesser of the tempera. This is just like any tempera, cheap. And this is gonna be, I'm gonna put my nicer art tempera here. And we are going to come on this side. Remember, because birds have 2 eyes, even if we're looking at a profile, we're gonna do the other side. And I'm going to use Terrell Powell's inspiration of doing the eye. So on his sculptures, you'll see that he combines, I just love his color combination, his pattern, his whimsical nature. But you'll see that he adds and combines some of those features. So we're gonna do the same. So on one side of our bird, we are going to have more of the whimsical, playful bird eye. And then on the other side, we're gonna have more of an eye that you might see on an animal or even a human. And I love how the white is popping against the black. And you can already tell the difference between this nicer art tempera and how it's going to work and behave compared to some of the other temperas that we have available for us. Also, I painted this piece to go on the tail feather, and it was supposed to be an accent piece. This blue, first of all, can hardly be seen against the turquoise. It did not kind of pop the way I'd wanted. So I'm gonna just take some time to paint over that with my neutral white. So if you are creating and you have an idea and you're working with it and it just doesn't look the way you want it to, or it's you start putting it together and you just keep going back to it, you keep looking at it and you have this uneasy feeling about it, then change it. This is just paint. There are colors that are harder to cover, but something like this is very simple and easy, and you can see how quickly I'm able to cover that coloration paint with this nicer tempera paint. So I'm holding the end. I've painted as much as possible, and I'm gonna just set it over to the side to dry, and then I'll come back to it in a little bit and I can finish the painting. Okay, I'm going to flip this over now. You can see how quickly that's already dried. It's not completely dry. You can still see the liquid, but it is bonded quickly enough to where I can flip this over. And now I'm going to reopen my glue, and I'm going to do the same for the other side. Adding glue only where my pieces are touching. This one actually goes back a little bit more, and this top one comes forward. Now I'm going to let this dry over to the side. I'm going to come back to this white. I'm turning my sphere while I'm painting this more than I'm turning, using this hand to turn more than I'm turning my brush. I'm just keeping my brush real steady. And sometimes I try something and then I go back and I change it. So I originally painted the inside of this sphere, the hole in this wooden sphere. And I'm now coming back and painting that white inside. I'm going to put this over to dry. tempera dries quickly. This isn't perfectly dry, but it's dry enough for me to do this bottom part. Let it dry again. Okay, whenever I place my bird body up, I definitely can see the unpainted sides. Ooh, learn from Mrs. Barlow. Maybe you should just take the time and go ahead and paint both sides, right? It's okay. It's okay to make, have a thought and then go back and say, no, that didn't work. So now I'm going to carefully go back and paint this underside, making sure that I'm not touching my orange bird body. So if you're having to go back and do the same thing I am, then make sure that you're going slow and not trying to rush yourself. My glue has bonded to where I'm able to do this part. You probably need to put your piece down, let it dry, go do something, and come back. Even my edges, my goodness. And some of these wood pieces are a little jagged and a little more difficult to get all the parts painted. So just do your best. Now I'm just going to turn my body over, and I'm not having to touch the wings at all, except for with my brush. And because they are dimensional, they are slightly raised off, so they're not touching the orange background. If you are using the regular tempera paint, you're not going to have this see-through quality. And so if you were using the tempera, it's going to cover your pieces a lot better. And you're not going to have to do as many coats or touch-ups that maybe you've had to do with the colorations. The colorations, they're so fun, and they've been good for us for a lot of our pieces this summer. And it just really depends on, you know, whether or not you like the idea of something being kind of see-through or transparent. Okay, so I have my under wings painted now. I think I'll be able to let this dry. I'm gonna set it up like this so that the wings aren't touching my protective parts. I'm gonna let that dry for a few minutes. And now I'm going to come back and add a little more detail to my eye. I know that this painting is not true to the bird I chose. This is just a whimsical piece. We are having fun. We are taking a beautiful creature and creating it in a style that's inspired. And so we're just having some fun. And that's the great thing about art. Art can convey so many different feelings and emotions and ideas. And when we are creating this piece, what do you think people are going to think when they look at this sculpture? We're not making a statement. We're just having fun. So maybe the idea of whimsy. Okay, if you have had to go back and fix a couple of pieces like I have, if you've had to work on some details, now is a good time to let your pieces dry, and we will come back in a few minutes and finish gluing everything down. Okay, we have our pieces, the paint is drying, and we are ready to start putting more of our pieces together. Remember, we're using a little bit more glue than what we would have done with our collages, just because this is wood and we are binding it from one wood piece to another. So make sure that you are adding enough glue to where it's going to stick, but you don't want necessarily the glue overflowing and just going everywhere. So some of these pieces I'm going to move over to the side and let dry. And now I'm going to come back to my bird body. I had to go back and paint parts of the underwings. And now I'm ready to go ahead and glue the body down. I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to the tops of the legs, like so, and then place my body on. Just turn it to the side and make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Press it down just slightly. Notice that it's already sitting by itself. And now I'm ready to start adhering some of these other pieces that are extras for this. Gonna glue my eye on this other side about the same as what I did on the what I consider the front part. And when we originally looked at Terrell Powell's pieces, some of his sculpture examples, we noticed that sometimes he used different don't do that, boys and girls. I need to let this dry, but so I'm not going to hold it up, but he used one kind of idea for one eye, and then he used a different idea or image for the other eye. So I'm going to let this dry. And bond. And let's see how we're going to add this tail. Do we want to add it so that when we're looking at the piece, we see the tail? Do we want it to be more flush to the body? We could actually put it right here on this back side, like so. And so it looks similar to how the real bird tail looked. I think I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna add glue on this back side because it's easier to know where that's gonna go than where to place it on my tail. If you have glue dripping, just take a moment. Typically this is a good kind of strong glue. It's not going to run much, but because this is standing up, the gravity is going to pull that liquid down. And I'm actually just going to tear a little bit of my paper towel that I have nearby and kind of wipe some of that. If I had a toothpick, I would maybe take a moment to kind of get it in there, maybe a Q-tip. We'll get some of that off. Okay, so this is the back part, but if I were to turn it over, you can see how that is going to look. You could actually lay it down to do this, but this part of the bird body is not flat to the table, so that's why I'm working with it standing. And this just kind of shows you how awesome this glue is. This is why I build with this type of glue. Okay, this is still wet, but we can start playing around with it some. Okay, I've run into a problem. I can't put this eye on if it cannot be hanging out over the side. So I can put my bird head like this and then put my eye on the other side. I can put my bird head like this, and the eye will still fit. That's, I think, what I'm gonna have to do. When you're building, sometimes you're putting these pieces together, and this is just part of having to figure it out. I think I would have rather have had my head like this because the bird is somewhat smaller. So let's see what I can do. Add my head, and then we'll play with the eye on the other side. I was wiping and not pressing. If you're needing to do the same thing I'm doing, once again, you could lay this down. This might take some time where you're having to apply pressure, but you can't push down on everything or other parts of your piece might have some problems. And this might be a part where your loved one's helping you. Maybe you have this idea of your bird sculpture and you've been able to glue these parts that are balanced, and maybe you're having some problems now, like I am, with some of the final details. This is a good time for a loved one or an older sibling, brother, sister, to help you with this part. And you can actually leave it. If I were to leave this to let this dry, I would probably try to put a book underneath the tail so I could cushion it and give it some stability underneath. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with letting your piece dry and being able to make sure that the bond is good and secure. So we have our bird sculpture, our whimsical fun bird sculpture. Okay, we have let our piece dry, and maybe we have even gone back and added some more detailed patterned detail to our bird with our neutrals, black and white. And now I'm going to finish with this piece. I had to take it off earlier in one of the videos because of the placement of my bird head. So I'm going to turn this around, and originally it was going to be glued over here in the same spot as the eye on the front part, but I was not able to do that and get the head where I needed it to be. So I'm going to place it here, and it's going to be slightly off of where the other eye is, but whenever I turn this over, you can see the back of the eye, and it's almost like a 3/4 view, not necessarily a pure profile, but it's almost as if the bird's head is turning, and we're starting to see this part of the head and face. And so I'm going to have this dry. And remember earlier when I tried to stand my sculpture up to let a piece dry and it just plopped off. So I'm actually going to lay this down and let it dry. I could keep going. I am constantly tweaking and going back and looking at my piece, trying to see how I feel about it. Sometimes I even rework it, or I might repaint certain areas or touch up certain areas. But let your piece dry, sit it over to the side, take a look at it and see how you feel about it. If there's something that just bothers you, go back and work on it. If you don't like how light some of your colors are, go back and carefully darken some of those areas. Add some more pattern with your black and white neutral. I hope you had fun creating this whimsical wooden sculpture in the style of a Texas artist. And I hope that you were able to create a bird that you enjoy looking at.